Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about the government's new approach to checks on EU goods entering Britain, brought to you by the Institute of Export and International Trade. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Executive Editor at the Institute, and I will be your host for this afternoon. And just a quick note to say that this is a webinar we repurposed from the original title, which is to do with E&S declarations, but obviously the government has changed its approach to those declarations, which is why we're running this webinar. Next slide, please. Now, it's my delight to welcome our speaker today in Arshad Dadaboy. Hi, Arshad, how are you today?
I will, very well, yourself?
Yeah, good, very good. It's sunny in North London, and I'm looking forward to finding out more about this topic. So great to have you with us.
My pleasure, thank you.
And as you can see, Arshad is a customs and trade specialist at the Institute with vast experience working both within and outside of government as a trade advisor in both the UK and abroad. So you're definitely in safe hands today. Next slide, Faye. Before we get into the presentation, we're going to run a quick poll to find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So we are here asking, what is your understanding of the government's new approach to import controls for EU goods entering Great Britain? While you are answering that, some housekeeping notes from me. Firstly, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window to the right-hand side of your screen. We hope to get to a number of your questions today during the Q&A, but please note we cannot guarantee that we will get to every single question in the allocated time, which is about 45 minutes. As such, I'll be prioritizing questions that have relevance to the wider audience, so I won't be going into company or sector-specific queries as such. Finally, you will receive access to today's slide pack as well as a recording of the webinar in a follow-up email we will be sending over the next day or so. So please do try to listen in carefully to today's discussions. And for those of you who are on the CDS webinar the other day, that email is coming this afternoon, so apologies for the delay on that. But I'm going to close the poll now and share the response. So, and also the announcement was made only a few days ago, so only 3% of you have a very strong understanding, 36% of you have quite a strong understanding, but over half of you don't understand it, and 10% of you don't understand it at all. Arshad, I mean, it's not been that long since the announcement was made. Is that surprising at all, the level of understanding of the new rules?
No, not really. No, it is a bit of it is confusing. Companies were preparing and gearing up towards introducing those changes, and those changes weren't going to be easy changes. So not surprising at all. Absolutely.
Well, Arshad's going to now talk through what the changes actually mean. So on the next slide, it's my delight to hand over to you, Arshad. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you. Next slide, please. So today's session, it's a pleasure to be here today to share some of the seminar today and to go through what's changed. So we're going to be talking about what's changed and the new developments following the announcement, what importers still need to know, because there are some pertinent points that you need to be aware of because of the changes and what's still in place. And then we'll go through what the IT systems are like and what the documentation requirements are, and what the new proposed digital system will be looking like. Thank you. Next slide, please. So as it stands, the original plan here, that's presented on this slide towards you. So from the 1st of January, we knew that animal and animal byproducts not for human consumption, such as blood, carcass, bones, organs, unhatched eggs, and high priority plants such as seedlings, agricultural machinery, cultivation seeds, and plants for cultivation did require SPS certification and notification on the IPAFFS system. What we would have seen, and let's put this in context, would have seen from the 1st of July, and I'm sure many of you started the preparations and the training internally within your organizations, was the introduction of safety and security declarations prior to goods entering, prior to import into Great Britain. That would have been phytosanitary and other documentation required for meat products for human consumption, animal byproducts, germinal products, plant and wood products, timber, bark, and animals. And these products, if required, would have been subject to physical inspection at border control posts. 1st of September, again, more changes, would have seen physical changes and physical inspections and possibly certifications of dairy products like milk, yogurt, cheeses, fromage frais, etc. Things like that, again, would have had some further introductions and inspections. And finally, in November, would have seen documentary identification, physical checks by veterinary inspectors on all live animals and animal origin products, and including composite and fish products coming through. So these were the changes that were going to happen. Next slide, please. And this is what it's going to look like now, much to many people's relief. We still will be logging SPS movements, particularly for our live animals, etc., and those sensitive plant products going into the agriculture, seedlings, etc. But nothing else is now going to be introduced until potentially the end of 2023. The next slide, please. So what does this mean? What's the government has said? Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, our Brexit Opportunities Minister, has said that he doesn't want to impose new administrative burdens, risk disruption at ports and to supply chains. But just thinking about this a little wider in terms of the context, this actually means controls are no longer being introduced for EU goods coming in. This actually now means that the requirement for phytosanitary declarations have now been postponed at border control points, and this also means a requirement. There is no longer a requirement for safety and security declarations, no more requirements for health and for further on SPS imports. And the wider impact of this, because those introductions, had they been put in place, were going to prohibit the importation of chilled meats like beef, pork, lamb, mutton, goat meat. Chilled or frozen minced poultry meat would have been prohibited. Anything that's mechanically separated meat, that would have been prohibited. So it is actually a significant development for the British consumer. The intention now is to digitalize the whole approach, and we're going to be talking about the single trade window initiative that is being explored and floated at the moment. But really, more importantly, particularly for British businesses and the consumer, the government now believes that the change in approach is going to save almost £1 billion per year due to the lower administrative costs of this. And at the moment, given the situation politically with Ukraine, the cost of living crisis, that's quite a significant saving that we'll hope to see coming through. Transport industry leaders as well have commented that the extension will now ensure smooth flow of goods through our key ports and little backlog. So that's what the intentions and the thinking behind what we have seen in this announcement. The next slide, please. So moving on to what importers still need to do. Sorry, IT systems and documentation. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, next slide. Thank you very much. Lovely. Okay, so what do importers still need to do? So they still need to complete import declarations, making sure that those paperwork are still presented timely, accurately, and in the right format, and making sure, and this is where we find we'll be finding a lot of companies falling foul of origin rules, and it's extremely important where those companies now who are bringing in goods in can claim preference. By claiming preference, it makes your business more competitive. You avoid paying any duties, and it's quite important that you can claim preference where possible. And how do you claim preference? Well, preference is quite a complex area, although we do here at the Institute of Export have a rules of origin course, which you're welcome to sign up to. But yes, essentially what preference does is it allows you to bring goods in duty-free. Now, how do you do that? Well, there are a number of core principles around rules of origin and how you can claim preference. particularly in the agriculture and sort of the extractive industries, the primary industries as we commonly know them. These would be wholly obtained. So if you're a farmer, as long as those the animals have been born, bred, fed, fattened, slaughtered, etc., in a particular country, that would be sufficient to claim preference upon. Also, I mean, fish as well. You know, if it's caught and in particular waters, you can claim preference there. And there are other principles of rules of origin which UK companies do really need to brush up upon. Other principles can be substantial transformation, where the chapter heading has changed. You've done something to the goods. You've manufactured from one commodity to another. So that's something you can also claim preference upon. Other rules of origin are the sort of the max norm rule, where you can offset certain costs and see how that works. And there's also rules of tolerance as well. So there's a tolerance rule where you can add a particular percentage of non-originating goods, yet still have the benefit of claiming preference. So these are certain rules that really, if you are a trader, an importer, you want to remain competitive, you want to make it easy for yourselves, then get yourselves sort of brush up on your origin rules, and hopefully you can take benefit from that. Another key thing as well is that there are certain statements now you would need to put on your paperwork claiming preference. We're now finding on both sides of the channel of customs officials beginning to question the origin of the preference rule itself. Are you claiming preference? Where is it in the paperwork? And if so, under which category? And sometimes in rare cases, but you do need to be prepared for that, is how you are claiming preference, under what basis. I've talked to you about some of the principles, tolerance, wholly obtained, but they may even ask you, we want to know how you've claimed it. We want evidence of how you are going to be claiming preference. So those, just a tip for the traders out there, is have those open, transparent conversations with your supply chain, with your customers, that look, you know, if we are challenged, these are the answers, and we have them ready, preventing unnecessary delays and anything like that. Another thing to watch out now you've got the time, companies have time, we've got this easement in place until potentially later next year, is getting ready for the chief to CDS transition. Yes, the grand old lady of chief is now getting ready to retire, and we're going to see all imports ceased to be going on to chief by September the 30th, and exports going on to, again, seizing on chief and migrating to CDS in March next year in 2023. So again, you've got plenty of time now, while you've sort of freed up all this administrative burden, to start getting clued up on the chief movements. Okay, so then we're moving on to IPAFFS. So that still stays in place. You'll still need to pre-notify on agri imports via IPAFFS, and you've still got the 4-hour derogation, which remains in place and remains unchanged. Again, transits of EU to agri goods from GB to EU will require pre-notification on IPAFFS and traces, so there's no changes there. And additional export health certificates are required, but an intra-trade animal health certificate must also be created in traces. Most movements of marine caught fish and some shellfish still need to be accompanied by a catch certificate. So again, no changes in that area at the moment. Next slide, please. So before we talk about this, it's important to note that whilst we've had this easement extended until late next year, so the administrative burden is relieved, it hasn't been reciprocal. So if you are exporting food into the EU or items into the EU, you still need to be prepared to submit any documentation, or if the importer, depending on what Incoterms you agreed, you'll still need to manage the EU side of the process. So it's not a reciprocal arrangement. Don't sort of assume that, oh, because we've had an extension of easement, it's been reciprocated. It hasn't. So that's one thing to remember. And now let's just go through some of the checks that have been introduced already, and these have actually been in place since January 2021. So document identity physical checks at place of destination for live animals, they continue to be. Animal byproducts not for human consumption, again, that's in place. Both both will require export health certificates, and high plant high priority plants and plant products that we mentioned about seedlings, little saplings, things that are ready for cultivation. And also in this category is used farm equipment. So if you're bringing in farm equipment from mainland Europe, they will need to be checked as well in case they've been contaminated with any bugs, etc. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Arshad. I'll step in here to do our next poll. So I'll launch it now. Just bear with me a second. Now, there have been a lot of headlines about the future of the Northern Ireland Protocol this week, with the UK rumoured to be considering suspending elements of it, which may prompt a retaliation from the EU, though we don't know what nature that would be yet. It could include suspending elements of the UK-EU trade agreement, and this could itself lead to an imposition of new tariffs on British goods entering Europe or European goods entering Britain. So we're running this poll to gauge the atmosphere and feeling of businesses towards the possibility of a trade dispute between the UK and the EU, beginning with a question over its impact. Arshad, while people are answering that poll, we've had a question from Harry, who asks, how can we identify which category or SPS category our goods fall within?
Okay, that's a good question from Harry there. So I would go by, there's a little bit of a sort of process here. You'd go and check what the commodity codes are for those products that are coming under the SPS category, and then look on the DEFRA website. Now the DEFRA website is extremely comprehensive, and once you've got the commodity code, you can check against the DEFRA website, and that should be able to open up all the answers to help you what comes under the SPS category.
Terrific. I'll give you a few more seconds to answer that question. We've had another question come in from Martin, who asks, where can you find or download export health or phytosanitary certificate forms?
So that you can go onto the EHC online, and you'll need to register via the government gateway website. And once you have an account, if you go onto EHC online, that should be able to, you can download all the forms there.
Thank you, Arshad. I'm going to share the result of the poll now. Thank you everyone for responding. So unsurprisingly, most of you, well, not most of you, but 36% of you said you do not know at this stage, which is completely fair enough given we don't know what's going to happen. But for those of you who have made a prediction or have more of a sense of it, 22% of you said you'd be severely impacted, 26% of you said you'd be impacted but not severely, and 15% of you would not be impacted. Arshad, again, it's probably not surprising, is it, that response given just where we are at the stage of the story?
Yeah, there is a point of nervousness at the moment. We're not sure how this is going to play out, if it indeed does play out. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of nervousness, and let's hope that the two parties can resolve any potential disputes through negotiations.
Thank you, Arshad. And we've got a follow-up poll to do as well. So we're going to ask you, if you said you are going to be impacted by any potential trade disputes, what would that impact be? And you can select all that apply here: higher import cost due to tariffs, higher export cost due to tariffs, uncertainty among suppliers or customers, and also increased requirements for licenses and certifications. A few people are saying that is this whether we're going to be solely focused on agri-food goods? It's not. It's, I mean, the large reason why there is some focus on agri-food goods is that the big change was the removal of a lot of the rules that were due to come in on 1 July for goods subject to sanitary and phytosanitary checks. But the new approach the government is taking towards digitising customs checks, it will apply potentially to all types of goods. And I mean, the question that came in from Helen is, will import declarations continue to be needed after the UK's borders are fully digitised?
Absolutely. In one way or another, the import declarations will still be required. And if it's digitised, it'll be if it does move towards digitisation, which is likely, it'll be some form of digital submission.
And sorry, Arshad, will that apply to E&S declarations as well, presumably?
It's too early to talk about E&S declarations, but looking at the way it's going to go, it hasn't been eliminated. It's just been the easement has been extended. So likely, yes, I would say yes.
Okay, thank you. I hope
It's
that's
a matter
been
really
helpful.
it's really a matter of watching this space. It's all going to be driven by government policy, At the moment, the easements move to November, so later next year. No fixed date, but it's a matter of watching this space really, and keeping your eye on the IOE webinars that we regularly do.
Absolutely. I was going to make the same plug. We will be doing more webinars as we find out more about what this new approach is going to look like. But I'm just going to quickly share the result to that poll. So interestingly, 72% of you have listed uncertainty among our suppliers and customers. And yeah, the 58% of you import tariffs, 46% of you export tariffs, and 43% of you increased requirements for licenses and certifications. But thank you everyone for answering. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to hand back to Arshad on the next slide to continue the presentation.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's just talk about GVMS. This is something many of the hauliers will be used to completing already as part of their day-to-day business and activities, but many traders actually are unaware of what GVMS is, and because this process or this action actually takes place behind the scenes. So GVMS has been introduced or was introduced to enable the faster clearance of vehicles at ports adopting the pre-lodgement model. So GVMS enables hauliers and carriers and port operators to use a single goods movement reference for a vehicle or trailer to process it on arrival and at departure points. So GVMS is a system. You apply for it. Most hauliers have it. In fact, all hauliers have it. They will register to get one. You register again on the .gov website. Have a government gateway account, and really, once you've logged it, you get a GMR number, and that's then allows the process to begin. The journey then begins. So key facts here, really some takeaway facts is the company creating the GMR will be responsible to the UK border authorities for all goods loaded onto the vehicle. The carrier must ensure all goods have the appropriate customs declaration in place, and all drivers ideally need to have a smartphone. And this is quite interesting, is that with that smartphone, once the truck has boarded the vehicle, and whilst it's not in flight but on the boat or on the ship coming across the channel, the driver will get a notification advising him whether to take the green route or the red route. The green route means he's ready, he's good to go. The red route means he'll need to pull in and have some form of inspection or a conversation with the authorities. So what's happening here is the beauty of this system is that really all the customs processing and clearance actually takes place while the truck is on the vessel itself. A sort of a point of caution here really is that a haulier must have a GMR reference number, and they won't be able to board before if they don't have one. So the trucks are getting turned away. They will get turned away. So they do need to have a GMR number before they arrive at port. And just here on the left-hand box here, there's a little mini checklist that we've put together. Hopefully that will be useful for our audience here on the information that's typically required to complete a GVMS movement and to create a GMR reference number. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the other thing, we've talked about IPAFFS and what IPAFFS is. So I mean, many people, just for the benefit of the audience, I thought we'll just sort of talk about IPAFFS and what it is and how it works. So IPAFFS is actually a portal used to submit pre-notifications on the arrival of agri-food products into the UK. It's a government portal, and it informs DEFRA of what's coming in into the UK port. For some products, importers will need to know the Latin name of the species or of what's going in, really. So in terms of, you may put in tomatoes or cucumbers, but you will need to know the Latin name of that species. So I'd suggest you brush up on your Latin. And if you're like me, a big fan of British fish and chips, cod is Gaidus mora, and potato chips are Segmina solania tuberum. So there's a little bit of a tip there. You can thank me later for that. One key point is once a notification is submitted, a reference number is generated, and it's essential for that reference number to be forwarded on to your clearing agent. They'll need that to present the documentation to make sure that the clearance is in hand. So that reference number is extremely important. And again, we've put a handy checklist here. So when you start entering your information onto the IPAFFS system, you'll need to have all this information at hand. Next slide, please. So what happens next? So now the journey has begun. You've done your GVMS. Potentially, you've put your IPAFFS notifications in. The goods then move towards the port. They're boarded successfully. The driver has a GMR reference. If he doesn't, he'll be turned away. We know that already. And then while the truck is on the boat or on the vessel, moving across to the UK, customs authorities will check and do a risk-based assessment on whether they need to pull this in or not, by which time, just before it arrives, they'll get a red or a green notification. Red means stop, green means you carry on, and then the journey continues to the buyer's premises. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Arshad. I will be going down to the Chippy in a few days' time and using that Latin for sure. I'll be interested to see what response I get. We're going to do one last poll now. This is going to precede the next section, where we're going to be talking about some of the potential options for how how government may digitise some of the customs checks. And the question here is, what level of understanding do you have around concepts like the single trade window or ecosystem of trust? And there's a sliding scale there. A couple of questions for you, Arshad, while people are answering that poll.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
A question from Gary, and a few people have raised the fact that there were kind of technical glitches with GVMS recently. So Gary's asked, under the new approach, will we need to continue using GVMS?
Yes, absolutely, but only for ports that have adopted the pre-lodgement model. So that would be Dover, Eurotunnel. Imports from Republic of Ireland are exempt from GVMS until otherwise updated or notified by UK government. So I mean, there's the .gov website continues to update this, so it's best to have your finger on the pulse and keep an eye on that too.
Thank you, Arshad. And just regarding those glitches, obviously they did happen, but the Institute, through its daily update, will continue to update traders about any further notifications from government about the usage of GVMS. A question on IPAFFS as well. So Sadie has asked, will the data fields in IPAFFS remain the same for the foreseeable future?
So as far as we're aware, it's expected to remain unchanged. The CHED formats planned for 20th of June will no longer be implemented. So it's expected to remain broadly the same.
Great, thank you, Arshad, and I hope that's been helpful, Sadie and Gary. I'm going to close this poll now, and this is, thank you everyone for responding, very revealing. So only 1% of you have a strong understanding. Again, that's probably not surprising given that these are very early development concepts, but 8% of you do have quite a strong understanding, and a vast majority of you either have a weak or no understanding at all. 55% of you no understanding at all. I mean, Arshad, you're about to talk about these concepts a little bit in the next few slides.
Absolutely. But yeah, not surprising at all. Extremely new. There's not been much press coverage at the moment on single trade window or the ecosystem of trust. Very new. It's in its infancy at the moment. So let's talk about what it's going to look like and how traders can benefit from it.
Fantastic. Well, on the next slide, I'll hand back to you to do so.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is a single trade window? So by definition, it's a facility that allows parties involved in trade and transport to lodge a standardized information and documents with a single entry point to fulfill all import, export, and transit regulatory requirements. So it's one-stop shop, really. You drop it in one place and it sorts itself out, essentially. Next slide, please. So this is what an illustration of what we think it's going to look like. Effectively, it's a self-declaration of border digital data. See, the aim is to work with traders, carriers, hauliers, agents, intermediaries to have information is provided ahead of the shipment leaving the shipper's premises before arriving in the UK. Using a single fingerprint to enter a single trade window, to update information into IPAFFS, GVMS, HMRC, and provide an additional risk-taking data set of information. So you can already actually see how easy this will become. I mean, it's a conceptual model at the moment, and we're hoping it will go through because it really will make it easier. It'll streamline that process. So using the export declaration data from an EU agent, carrier, or haulier, the fields will self-populate. Special procedure information we mentioned earlier, like sanitary and phytosanitary certificates, data to populate IPAFFS, again, digitally and automatically. So an extra future digital information to be added via blockchain infrastructure, that's something that potentially could help too. So, it's taking any sort of risk out of the system. It's a digital seal, which means it can be trackable and traceable. There'll be biometrics information as well. So really, it's going to, if it does take off, and it looks like it will, these processes will be achieved by using standardized data sets. An example is the ICC trade environment addressing those challenges. So really, you can see how, from just a conceptual sort of illustration here, how businesses could benefit. There won't be several portals to log on. It'll be sort of a one-stop submission place. Next slide, please. And so what are the benefits really of this? So today, the information for the export out of the EU and the information on EU is communicated individually to each government department, both sides of the channel. So it's duplicated many times really, and it can cause frustrations. Country of origin, net weight, transit routes, transit conventions, etc. So rather than entering this data several times into several different portals, it will be submitted once and it will be digitally put through to all the other portals, thereby saving time, saving cost. There will be potential self-serve options for traders if they don't want to use an intermediary, for example, and we're hoping it will be cost-saving too. So next slide, please. So additional benefits from this, we are hoping it'll reduce waiting times at border points, and we know that from industry experts that this is a sensitive issue at the moment. Reduce the need for examinations. All the information is on one portal, therefore the inspectors or the authorities can check several documents because they're all now in one place. Reduce backward and forward communication between various departments in case there's an inquiry or investigation that's required. And also it puts all the information ready in one place for traders, for importers, for agents, for intermediaries, for hauliers, for carriers, etc. So it's everything is one in kind of a repository system where it can be sort of pulled out if and when it's required. And most importantly, it's optimization of resource, optimization of data, and potentially we could even use some custom special procedures too. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Arshad. I think that was a terrific presentation, particularly given the announcement about the new approach was only made at the end of April, and we're still yet to gather details from the government. The target operating model, as you noted, is I think going to be published in the autumn. So hopefully that's been helpful for everyone as a recap of what has happened for import rules, but also as a look ahead to what isn't going to happen, but also what might happen. So a lot to keep your eyes peeled on. I'm not sure I got that phrase right, but a lot to keep your eyes looking out for over the next few months. We're going to do a few more questions, and the first question is from Samantha, but it's also one I'm really interested in as well, is the digitalizing all these checks by the end of 2023 seems really ambitious. Is it feasible? Can it be done?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is nothing new. It's already in place and working in some of the countries around the world. Kenya, Singapore, New Zealand are just amongst a few that have already adopted a efficient, streamlined system such as this. The UK has already got a digital strategy. It's already moving in that direction in terms of digitization of its services, not just within these government departments like HMRC, DEFRA, but other wider government departments are also going. That's the direction of travel, is digitization. So really, yes, it can be possible. and work has already started. We just don't know what it looks like. This is all purely conceptual. But looking at the examples of New Zealand, Singapore, Kenya, we all know how strong Kenya is in agri exports. We all our roses, mange two, beans, etc., chilies, strawberries, all this comes from Kenya. And had it not been for those initiatives out in Kenya, there would be delays, and we all know how perishable and how sensitive these products are. So really, yes, it is. But as an institute, we can't definitely say what digital checks and how they will look like. This is purely conceptual, but we are in close communication with central government about its digital plans, and it's just a matter of watching this space and looking out for more webinars.
Thank you, Arshad. And I did post a link actually to a webinar we did featuring the Cabinet Office about the single trade window, where we go into a little bit more detail about the government's plans. So I posted that in the chat for everyone, along with a couple of other links. But the other links I sent were a Wars of Origin webinar we did earlier this year, and a webinar giving more detail about IPAFFS and GVMS. So hopefully all of those will be useful for you. A good question from Darren, which actually follows on incredibly well from that last question, which is, what can we do to actually prepare for whatever the government's new approach will be?
I would say there's three things. Firstly, continue following the updates of the border operating model. It's been extended, revised, improved. So again, we've seen this extension now until late next year. So it's one of the things, if you want to keep your finger on the pulse, to say is keep an eye on the border operating model. Another initiative is to register on DEFRA. DEFRA have got they can update you with updates coming in constantly. So register on the DEFRA website, put your email address in, get that registered, and you'll continue to get updates from that. Register on our own website, or with IOE, we send out flyers and updates quite regularly too. We have our finger on the pulse, not only with governments, but also in terms of international trade and development around the world. So it's quite a good sort of mailing list to join. You're not going to get bombarded with rubbish. It's good quality, quantitative information. And finally, keep in touch with the border control post that will be handling those goods. Establish a dialogue, and also wider. There's nothing like having wider stakeholder engagement. So keep in touch with freight forwarding organizations, industry organizations, the agricultural people, the fruit growers association, etc. Any industry trade associations and bodies. It's also useful to have your finger on the pulse with those organizations too.
Thank you. A lot of those recommendations actually echo some of the recommendations the Institute had in a paper we did on digital trade, which is on the website. I can post a link to everyone if you're interested to read it. Interesting question from Rebecca actually just come through. Will there be a new government agency to run the single trade window, or is it an existing agency? Rebecca, I think my understanding of that from the webinar we did on that topic is that Cabinet Office are leading on it, but it's very much cross-departmental because of how much it impacts Border Force, DEFRA, and other agencies. Does that sound about right, Arshad?
It's too early to say how this is going to pan out. We may even have a digital department. Who knows? It's too difficult. It's 5 years ago we didn't have Department for International Trade, and that it was a quasi type organization, and then we saw a minister being appointed, and now that's a fully fledged government department. So it's too early to say. Let's again, it's much about watching this space, looking at the strategy, looking at how other governments have moved towards digital, and how even we are in many of our government departments. For example, HMRC, all the VAT returns, etc., are now digitalized. So it may be that we may have a digital Ministry of Digital Affairs. Who knows? It's still too early.
Yeah, I think so the Department for Culture, Media and Digital is one of the departments, and I think it's Nadine Doyce as one of the people who was behind this new approach, along with Jacob Rees-Mogg. So it's definitely an interesting part of the government's overall digital strategy. A question again, you may have a similar answer, but from Abby and a few people have been asking this, which is, will the government's new approach, single trade window or otherwise, be free for traders to use?
Again, it's too early. There's no indication that it's going to be chargeable. There's no indication that it's going to be free. It's pretty much a matter of watching this space and again, keeping your finger on the pulse to see how this works out.
Thank you, Arshad. And do one last question because we are coming close to the end. So this is one from Louis who asks, will import controls for all goods entering Britain from non-EU markets, as well as EU markets, eventually be digitised?
Yes, we will treat all, the indications are that all imports will be treated the same, EU and from the rest of the world. There may be a phase, for example, just like if we look at Chief and the CDS migration imports and then 6 months later exports, but the long-term objective is that yes, all imports will be treated the same.
Thank you, Arshad. I think we have done quite a few questions there. I mean, we've had loads of questions come through as ever, so thank you everyone for putting them in. A few of these are slightly off topic or a little bit too company specific, so I won't be able to ask all of them. I think we've asked a few, which hopefully will help everyone with our understanding of today's topic. But thank you for sending those questions in, and as ever, we will look at ways to factor in the questions you've asked into our future webinar planning and our content and our daily updates as well. So thank you for the questions, everyone. But on the last slide, I'm going to wrap up now. So thank you, Arshad, for that presentation and for answering the questions as well. We hope everyone has found that useful. On the last slide here, you'll see some of the support that the Institute is providing to traders, including training, consultancy, our lunchtime learning webinars for members, and much, much more. The Institute continues to be on hand to support businesses to trade compliantly during an ever-changing trade landscape, whether that's due to the latest tranche of Brexit rule changes, climate change, the war in Ukraine, and everything else which impacts international trade. Export.org.uk is where you can find out more information about our services. Just a reminder that we will be sending out a copy of today's webinar. That includes the slides and the recording, and that will come to you over the next day or so. And again, for those who were on the CDS webinar the other day, that email is coming out today. So apologies for the delay there. Please get in touch if for any reason that email doesn't come through to your main inbox. We'll get that over to you as quick as possible. As you leave, please do let us know what you thought of today's webinar and any suggestions for topics on future webinars by completing the exit survey. But for now, thank you for joining me and Arshad today, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. So thank you everyone and goodbye.
Bye-bye.